Good evening all, and welcome. Tonight, we're going to be venturing into the dark world of Let's Not Meet. I'm sure you're all quite familiar with it already. So for now, it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. My name is Noah, and this is an experience that happened to me a few years ago. I used to live in East St. Louis and was 17 at the time of these events. I am 19 now. After all of this, I moved and have since been living in the Twin Cities. I'd say I, at least, think about what happened once a week. Now, coming from a place like East St. Louis, I have my fair share of stories to tell. But out of all of them, this one is by far the scariest. I used to hang out with this girl from high school I liked called Charlotte. I met Charlotte in sophomore year, and we often hung out outside of St. Louis in Weldon Springs. This was at her grandparents' place, which is a suburb further away. Despite her being a social outcast, she seemed to gain the attention of some people as she was attractive. One of which was someone at her previous school she transferred from freshman year and somehow befriended. His name was Zeke. Initially, I didn't find him weird. We hung out a few times, none of which were really bad. It's just that he gave off not so good vibes. However, when it was just me and Charlotte hanging out at her place, Zeke showed up unannounced. This was one of the many warning signs he gave that he wasn't really good to be around. Me and her were laying down on her couch when we saw headlights outside. I knew it was Zeke because he pulled up in his crappy and poorly maintained Toyota Corolla. This annoyed us both in some ways. He didn't exactly pick up on social norms. He wasn't autistic or anything, but he was strange. So basically he just came in and dampened our day, which was pretty normal for whenever he came over. I could list all the other things he did, but it would take too long. If it wasn't enough, he owned quite a bit of expensive stuff, including the car. He was our age, didn't have a job, nor did he live with his family. So it's safe to assume he got into his fair share of trouble. I don't think I need to explain why where I lived was terrible. If you think of the Bronx, South Chicago, or even Detroit, it's bad. But then you haven't been to East St. Louis. I hated it so much there. I would often stay at Charlotte's grandparents' place and would periodically skip school. And having this Zeke kid didn't exactly make me feel any safer living here. Me and Charlotte went to school together. However, as I said earlier, Zeke did not, and went to school on the Illinois side, while me and Charlotte went to Missouri. We were both sitting at the lunch table together when I heard someone's voice shouting, not so much in a threatening way, but to get someone's attention. When I heard Charlotte's name being called, I turned around and saw Zeke, which creeped me out as he didn't go to our school. It wasn't just him though. Several of his friends came by. I got confused when I heard one of his friends say, "Who's that Asian bitch?" Right away, I knew in some way that Zeke was talking about Charlotte amongst his friends. He only had 2 friends with him, but he would always talk about being with many more, which I wouldn't put past his crazy ass, to be honest. They were generally just being annoying, so after the 3rd time his asshole friend got into Charlotte's personal space, I announced to them that if they didn't piss off, I'd beat their asses. They didn't take it well, and one of his friends came close to me and shoved me in the cafeteria seat. Without giving too much unnecessary detail, a fight broke out until the deans broke it off and realized that him and his friends didn't belong there, and the cops came. And as to what they did to them, I don't know. It was probably them being let off with a warning or something petty. I, on the other hand, was suspended for a few days and stayed home. Me and Charlotte were messaging each other one night at 2 in the morning. I had woken up to something that was going on outside my house, and as such, decided to go and grab a snack. I sat down at the kitchen counter watching YouTube videos on my phone when I got a message from Charlotte. It was obviously unexpected, and I opened it right away. This was on Snapchat, and it was a picture snap. It was a selfie with the caption, "I can't sleep." I didn't bother sending a snap back and instead messaged her, "How come?" "I don't know," she replied. We spoke for a good minute about stuff that didn't matter, until she brought up that someone was close near her house, leaving their headlights on. I initially asked if she knew the car, so I could figure it out if it was Zeke in his crappy blue Corolla. She said that it wasn't. It was a dark grey, probably black Honda Accord. As much as she tried brushing it off, I just couldn't. It gave me really bad vibes. We started to talk about irrelevant stuff and eventually fell asleep. However, once I was able to go back to school, Charlotte wasn't there. I didn't see her in any classes, and I messaged her to see if she was okay. While I can't say for certain, I just didn't get good vibes. What I mean by this is she generally seemed more distant. Her responses were shorter, not as if she hated me, but more like I was somehow dangerous to her. The next few days, she wasn't in school either, and I began to get genuinely worried. However, I spoke to Zeke about this, who pretty much hated me at this point, and after asking him on Snapchat and Instagram if she was okay, he blocked me. I began to feel hopeless. However, what I am about to tell you next was crucial in me finding out more. I stayed after school to finish an English assignment when I heard some idiots outside being obnoxious. I looked out, and who did I see other than Zeke and his few friends? I ignored them initially, but when their chatter finally got to a halt, I looked out again. He got into his car and drove away, but when I saw Zeke's friends getting into a car matching Charlotte's description of a dark grey Honda, my eyes widened, and I got a bad feeling. Later that night when I got home, I texted Charlotte to check on her, but she wasn't responding. A day passed by. She didn't open my message. And that's when I walked through the neighborhood and stopped at her dad's place. He answered the door and asked what I wanted, and asked if he knew where Charlotte was. Her dad sighed and gave me a look of what I can only describe as devastation. His demeanor changed from angry and aggressive to downright hopeless. He told me that Charlotte left a few days ago and hasn't returned since. I asked if she told where she was going, but he didn't know. That's when I explained to him she hasn't replied to any of my texts, and I did the same thing with her grandparents, but they said they hadn't seen or heard from her either. Immediately, any optimism in me was gone, and I felt like giving up. Charlotte didn't have many friends, and neither did I, so it was almost just always us talking together. A few days later, after no response, I went to the police station and told them that she was missing. I went on to say that I suspected Zeke and his friends of being involved in what happened. After nothing happening for a day or so, I got a snap from Charlotte. My eyes widened in excitement. However, that excitement quickly went away when I saw a selfie of someone that wasn't her. He was in some worn-down, derelict-as-hell building. I knew this because a lot of the wall and roof was missing, and it showed the streetlight from outside. I replayed the snap to see if anything stood out, to no avail. If I remember properly, it was probably one of his friends, because of a blue bandana he wore. There was no caption, and I wanted to respond, but I knew it wasn't her. I got so frustrated that I called the police and told them about my situation. To make it short, they said that they would investigate, whatever that meant. I visited Charlotte's grandparents and stayed the night, not wanting to go to school next day. I spoke to some people on Snapchat and Messenger, and at the same time was trying to find something to do about this. I began talking to one of my middle school friends who lived in another suburb called Eddie. While he didn't know Charlotte, he knew Zeke, and had added him on Snap. It was a silly idea, but they actually talked, which I didn't even expect at all. The next day after school, I met up with Eddie, and he requested Zeke's location on Snap. He was clearly stupid, because about 5 minutes later, Eddie pulled up his phone and his location was somewhere north of St. Louis. He turned his location off, and we took an Uber to the location. Zeke's Bitmoji eventually changed, from the one area he was at back to East St. Louis. We figured it would be worth a shot trying to see where he was and if Charlotte was there. The sun was starting to set, but we went anyway. Once we arrived, we were at the building that Zeke's Bitmoji was over, and well, judging by the appearance of them, it must have looked like it. There were 2 floors, and the upper floor had a lot of the wall and roof destroyed. In fact, it looked identical to the one sent to me that I saw in the snap. I knew Charlotte was there. She had to be. I decided to call her, and what happened next still makes my blood run cold. The actual fear I felt was pretty unmatched. As soon as I hit call, the ringing from the phone in my ear was quickly overshadowed by a loud ringtone coming from inside the warehouse. My eyes widened in terror, and the look on Eddie's face was just as terrifying. Despite the occasional car coming, it was pretty silent. But when I heard footsteps on the concrete and debris from upstairs, I crapped myself inside after seeing something. Barely illuminated by the streetlight was the silhouette of a figure standing near the open wall. It wasn't bright enough to see who, but either way, both of us ran and didn't look back. Once we thought it was safe, we called an Uber back, and the next day after school I returned to the police station and updated the cops with my findings, and told them about what I had found. However, the same officer I had told what I had found seemed to be getting annoyed with me, and I gave up on him. He said an officer would be sent over and that they would call me back. That's when I decided to take the next step in what was becoming my own investigation. Several days went by at school, and I returned next weekend back to her grandparents' place to update them and told them what I'd found. They'd left and gone to the police station on their own and came back after. In the next few hours, the police station called back and updated me. They had gone to the abandoned warehouse, and I asked them what they found. They said nothing. That annoyed me so much, and I didn't even show it to the officer how much I was angry. I ended the call, almost ready to give up hope. I updated Eddie on what I found, and the first thing he checked was Zeke's location, but he wasn't on the map anymore. After this, I decided I'd go further. Charlotte was pretty much my only real friend, and she meant the world to me, and I wasn't going to let her go missing or anything. It was Sunday now, and I was at her grandparents' feeling empty, so I went for a walk. I stopped at a nearby playground and just rested, got extremely bored, and was so burnt out that I almost napped at the picnic table outside. That's when I got a notification on Snapchat. Charlotte has added you as a friend. I opened and accepted it. Then I began to talk to her. I asked her if she was okay, but she kept giving me the same short response she would before, and then stopped replying altogether. Then next, I decided for whatever reason to look on the Snapchat map. I made the terrible mistake of forgetting to turn mine off, because when I looked on Snap Map, I saw Charlotte's Bitmoji right next to mine at the same park. It was broad daylight, and with this I studied my surroundings very quickly before deciding I shouldn't stay. I began to run in the opposite direction of where her location was, and in one quick move turned around, and for the briefest moment I saw someone standing off in the distance. Whoever that was, it wasn't Charlotte. I didn't take any time to observe. I just bolted and didn't go back. I went back on the app after I'd ran for several minutes and turned off my location. However, I saw that her Bitmoji was no longer at the park, but going down the same street I was. This freaked me out even more. I looked behind me and saw off in the distance the familiar figure of Zeke. This was my cue to run. I turned, running past her grandparents' house, and took many turns and didn't stop walking. It was a good 5 minutes later at this point that I called the cops, saying someone was chasing me. I gave them my location and the location of the park, and despite how repetitive me calling the cops had become, they looked everywhere for Zeke but couldn't find him or his car. To prevent him from going to her grandparents' place, the officer gave me a ride back to mine and told me to stay safe. Now, if that was Charlotte, she would have called me, sent a snap of herself at least or something. Obviously it wasn't. It was Zeke, and he was attempting to get me, which almost worked. Monday through Friday at school consisted of asking people if they knew who Charlotte was or if they had seen her. I was so close to giving up and doing something that realistically didn't help, but I felt obligated to. I was so hell-bent on getting answers and making progress that I resorted to doing it. But to my surprise, on Thursday, one of the freshman girls said she did. I asked her everything and if she knew where Charlotte was. She didn't know much about her, but instead directed me to one of her friends on Messenger, who was apparently a close friend of hers. I spoke to them back and forth for a few days, and when we started talking, she asked me if I knew someone called Liam. I didn't, but when she described the dude with the blue bandana, my stomach dropped. I told her about the snap I got sent from Charlotte's account that had someone of that description taking a selfie in it. To add on to that, I told her about the abandoned-looking building. Oh, and in case you're wondering, I did check, and no, her location was not on Snap Map like it usually was. That was the first thing I checked when I received the snap. We began to plan some kind of thing to find her, but I gave up. The next night during a weekend, I was staying up watching YouTube, where I saw headlights beaming through the blinds and tires against the pavement. I stopped and was frozen with fear. As soon as I heard a car door open and close, I didn't take any chances whatsoever. I opened my bedroom window and climbed out, running across my yard and into the neighbor's yard. I hid, but when I heard the sound of glass being shattered from the distance, I lost it and wanted to break down crying. I called the police and told them a break-in was going down. The only amazing thing about living in St. Louis was the fast response time, because within a few minutes the cop arrived, and I heard a familiar voice scream loudly, "Run!" I kid you not. There were footsteps exiting through the back door and through my yard, and coming closer. I felt extremely stupid for not running further, but if I hadn't stayed in the nearby yard, I would have even known a break-in occurred. I ran across the block, and from the distance I saw officers jumping the fence and chasing the guys, one of which was Liam. To make it short, I walked back over and my mum and I filled a statement. My laptop and several things were stolen, but that didn't matter now. I told the cops about how they were involved in one of my friends going missing. However, the next thing I'm about to tell you was the last to happen in this situation, and was the worst of it all. A few days later at 2 a.m., I heard my phone start chiming. I got frustrated at first, thinking it was my alarm going off, but that's when I saw a number I didn't recognize. I got extremely uneasy for some reason, and I decided to answer it. I am honestly so glad I did. I heard heavy breathing, not cliché, creepy heavy breathing, but panicked, more high-pitched breathing. And then I heard a familiar voice that wasn't Zeke's. It was Charlotte. "Hey, Noah!" She sounded panicked. Wait, Charlotte? She sounded like she was about to start talking again until she cut herself off. The last thing I heard before the phone got disconnected was the sound of loud footsteps against concrete, shattering glass and other debris and rubble. There was a gasp before the line got disconnected. I was fed up with this. I called the cops yet again and told them that I needed the number traced, and gave them the number that called me. They traced the location, which turns out wasn't coming from the abandoned warehouse where I thought she was at previously. She was in a completely different location southwest of St. Louis. I took my mum's car and drove to the location they brought up. Call me stupid, but I wanted to see it for myself. I stayed over the phone with the operator, and despite his constant warnings to not go, I didn't listen. Once I got there, I stayed nearby in the car. Without waiting too long, I saw the cops pull up. 2 officers went in, and I waited further for something. Since I decided to head over to the location, the operator had me stay on the phone, and I watched as multiple other squad cars arrived. I parked further away, and watched in almost sadistic amusement as I saw someone being dragged out by 2 officers who was actively struggling. And through my window I could hear him screaming. One of the officers grabbed his taser and shocked him. It was Zeke. I got the okay from the operator and stepped out. From there I approached the officer and explained I was the one who called and reported this. We spoke, but I won't bore you with all the legal stuff. In my peripheral vision, I saw an officer escorting someone out. My eyes widened with joy as I saw Charlotte. I called her name, and she looked over to me, coming over and running to hug me. She had several marks on her body and her face. I can say this. You can tell just how much someone is emotionally or generally scarred due to their reaction. She hugged me so tight and began to cry. I literally felt like suffocating. That's how tight it was. She admitted to me and the officers that she was hardly fed, beaten, and didn't elaborate much more. I'm surprised out of all of the things that they did to her, they didn't do something far worse. Who knows? They might have. She might be too scared to tell me about it. In addition, she said that she was carried into the Honda Accord. However, for some reason, this was on the same day that I returned to school, and I asked her about how come she was able to message me, and she said that she never did. That confirms that once she stopped showing up to school, it was Zeke the whole time. But besides that, Zeke being found here while screaming and resisting arrest was already enough evidence. She pressed charges, and I watched in sheer excitement as he was carried away in a squad car. I gave him the finger as he went off. This whole situation didn't get any media coverage, which I'm actually thankful for. I gave Charlotte a ride to her grandparents after everything with the cops was settled. To give some answers, she was being held in captivity by Zeke and his friends at this abandoned warehouse. After me and Eddie searched for it and found where they were, they moved locations. Later, after some court stuff which I wasn't involved with, she told me that Zeke admitted that he was planning on selling her to someone to pay off some money that he owed. He was sentenced to 25 to life for multiple charges, a lot of which was stuff I didn't know. Besides, on the obvious taking of a person, theft, and other things. He was also charged with homicide, arson, possession, use of drugs, amongst other things. Besides all that, all I can say is that I'm glad Charlotte is okay. As much as I wish I could have gotten Zeke myself or something like that, I'm glad he's in jail. Charlotte moved in with her grandparents and transferred to another school, and I transferred as well, moving out to where I am now. Charlotte and I have been talking ever since, and there's no point in telling how she is. It's not really related to any of this. But overall, we're both doing better now. Almost all the time, all you hear in these stupid false media stories are about the murder capitals of the country being the Bronx, South Chicago, and Los Angeles. And while yes, those places are bad, Central East St. Louis and St. Louis in general has the worst murder and crime rate of any city in the US, period. All I can say is this. I feel extremely fortunate to have made it out of there, and don't think I could name a worse place to live in. About 11 months ago, I started working at a big corporate retail store that specializes in tech, mostly high-end goods, part-time. I'm a female who's 6 foot tall and in my late 20s, a former NCAA water polo player. My job at said store was more behind the scenes. My primary duties were to answer calls and assist with orders, complaints, and scheduling via the phones. My secondary duties would be to assist the front lanes when lines got long. I'm a friendly, outgoing person and love to chat with customers. Some regulars I joke about various topics, but nothing ever that would be considered unprofessional nor suggestive, and I've never expressed any interest in any customer. All of this happens in a 2-month period. One day, a customer, an older gentleman who's in his mid-60s and around 6'6", he's become a regular customer in the last few days and comes up to me while I'm at the register and is making a purchase while holding a coffee. Jokingly, I ask where my coffee was, and he proceeds to order me a coffee. I decline it several times with, "Oh, no, I was joking. Thank you, though," and go about my day. Over the next few days, I'm noticing this guy more often, and I'm doing quite a few checkouts for him. There is small talk, as most customer service agents have with regulars, but he starts to mention highly personal details about me that I have never brought up in conversation, as I don't discuss my personal life with customers unless it's relevant to the conversation at hand. These comments include my route to work, what kind of car I drive, and the stickers that are on the back of my car, the college I went to, the apartment complex I live in, and what kind of decorations I have outside my front door. The first few times these tidbits are brought up, I brush them off as slip-ups, or he must have overheard me saying something to someone. But then he starts asking for my phone number. I decline giving him my number, stating it's against policy. So he starts insisting I take his number and call him. Again, it is stated that this is against policy, and I add that it is against corporate policy for me to take customers' information, and that I'm not allowed to hand out my information to customers. I'm sorry. As the days progress, he starts catching me as I come out from behind the register to run over to another department in our store for something. Again, I am neither a short nor small woman, and I do not physically intimidate easily. But this guy who towers over me repeatedly places himself in front of me and demands I give him my number. This happened 3 to 4 times. Each time and day he's getting closer to my personal space, demanding my phone number and information so that he can call me. When there are times he doesn't get me as his checkout associate, he gets angry and irate, physically attempting to insert himself into my space to demand my information. And there are several times co-workers have had to remove me physically from the situations because he is causing such a scene and getting so close to me that they are worried for my safety. At this point, I'm starting to get freaked out, and I'm feeling unsafe to work in my environment. So I bring it up to a couple of my supervisors who just laugh it off and say that I'm being paranoid. My dad is getting calls from me almost daily, telling him about my encounters and what this guy said or did. So finally he says I need to go and talk to the police and see what they suggest. I do, since my supervisors aren't doing anything about it, and I go and talk to the police department and explain the situation, and end up in tears, shaking, because it's finally hitting me that this guy is stalking and harassing me, and I feel helpless. They fill out a report and tell me to take it to my superiors to see if they can get pictures and information on this guy, so the police can contact him and issue a trespass, banning him from the property. I bring the case number to my supervisors, who start to do some digging. I will repeat, my primary job is behind the scenes, in a cave, and I am rarely out on the registers during my shift. They find that in a 30-day period, I had processed over 17 transactions with this customer, and that he had been coming in 4 to 5 times a week, sometimes twice a day, to buy $10 gift cards from our store. After taking pictures of his license plate and info from work, the police were able to find out that this guy lived over an hour and a half away from the store, and he was driving almost 3 hours every day just to make a purchase. Then, the security footage is looked at, and my supervisors notice they have no clear image of this guy. He knew where our store security cameras were located and pointing, so he hid his face and actual height by hunching over from the cameras. They also noticed that there were points where he would be in the store for 35 to 45 minutes at a time, just looking at the front registers waiting for me to appear so that he could make his purchase with me. If he didn't get me the first time, he would come back an hour or so later, right as I was about to get off work, because he knew the generics of my schedule. With no clear picture, the store had to wait on me to see this guy and point him out to a supervisor so they could issue the verbal trespass to him. He was able to come in and continue to harass me and threaten me for my information a few times because nobody really knew what he looked like. And by the time I had called for a supervisor, he had left, or they didn't know enough about the situation to trespass him. It took another 2 weeks before I was able to get a supervisor to trespass him from the store. He had cornered me again and harassed me for my number, and to check him out on the register, but I was able to slip away. When the supervisor approached him saying that he was trespassed for harassing an employee, he flat out denied that it was him, and said that they were mistaken. When the police department called him telling him the boundaries of the trespass and asked him for his side of the story, he told them I was just a girl that never told him no to a date, and that it's my fault for not saying that. He insisted that he shouldn't have been banned from the store, because if I really didn't want him to bother me, I should have just told him so. I saw him around my complex for a few weeks, and after a few months, I quit retail because I didn't feel comfortable there. I loved working there, but I would just rather never meet this guy again. When I was around 14, there was this guy that seemed to be around my age that used to be in my neighborhood. He didn't stay out there, but he had family that did. He was baby-faced, light-eyed, and kind of quiet, but he would talk to me. He didn't really play with us, he just kind of stood there watching us as we played. Maybe a family member told him to keep an eye out on his younger cousins. He would flirt with me from time to time, but I didn't think much of it. I think he had a crush on me. I think I might have had a crush on him at some point too as well. I remember one particular time he kissed me. It might have been more than just that one time, but I can't remember. And one of the neighborhood teenagers that was around my age and basically looked out for everyone on the block had said something to him along the lines of, "What did I tell you about messing with these young girls?" I just assumed he must have been around 16 and didn't think much of it. We would take walks around the block and talk. We would hang out every once in a while. Sometimes he would knock on my door or ring the doorbell for me to come outside. I think I might have even rode with him to a 7-Eleven a few times. Then I guess he either stopped coming around or I just became too old to play outside. Years passed, and I did not run into him, or if I did, it wasn't often. This year I was coming home, and he saw me park my car. He was driving down the street, and he stopped his car and got out. He kind of cornered me between the car door and my car, saying stuff like, "Hey, it's been a while. We should catch up." Nothing really seemed out of the ordinary, but his eyes just seemed crazy. It was like he was looking right through me. He didn't really have an expression on his face. Something just seemed off. I got this weird vibe from him. I remember asking him what his Instagram was, just in case I needed to show someone what he looked like, and he said he wasn't on there because of his job. Yeah, sure. I also knew that I was friends with his younger cousin on Instagram, so I figured I would just look at her page and see if she had any pictures of him show up. So I just went along with that, and as I slowly tried to move closer to my door, I went into the house and tried to shake this vibe that I felt from him. That night, he called me and asked if I wanted to go to the beach to walk around and catch up. Before I could even give a response, he asked, "Do you trust me?" Now, even though I trusted him before he asked, which I didn't, I'm damn sure didn't trust him now. Who just asks that out of the blue anyway? "Well, that's a weird question to ask. I'll have to call you back." He immediately got mad at me for saying I wanted to get off the phone. It was kind of like a switch went off. I assured him that I was going to call him back, which I didn't, and he finally calmed down, and I managed to hang up. He began texting me things like, "What do you like about me?" I think I responded something along the lines of, "I haven't seen you in over 14 years. You might not even be the same person." He proceeds to tell me what he liked about me. I did not even know what made me ask him, but I asked him how old he was. My stomach felt like I was on a roller coaster when I read his response. He said he was 37. Now, I'm 29, which means he is 8 years older than me. That meant that when I was 14, he was 22. This whole time, I thought he was only a few years older than me at most, and he was 8. That's when I started to realize that his, for lack of a better term, infatuation with me was not as innocent as I once thought. Now, throughout the years, I've had a problem with someone being outside my window. On one particular night about 4 years ago, my ex-boyfriend was drunk and mad that I wouldn't come outside to talk to him. He was outside my window trying to get me to go out. Then all of a sudden I heard 2 voices outside. Shortly after that, I heard my then boyfriend tell me to come outside, but it sounded like he sobered up in an instant. I told him no, and he told me that it was serious. When I finally went out, he told me that a guy was cutting through my neighbor's yard to hop my fence into my backyard. But because it was dark, he didn't see my then boyfriend until he was closer to him. My then boyfriend said something along the lines of, "What are you doing?" And the guy started to stumble over his words, saying he was just cutting through to get to the other side of the block. But he turned around and went back in the direction he came. So I just explained that because I don't even know what connected the 2 incidents in my mind. But I went to his account Instagram page and found a picture of him and texted it to my ex before I could even explain why I was sending him the picture. And without me even saying anything, he replied, "That's the guy that tried to get into your backyard." My stomach sunk so far into my ass I thought I'd never eat again. Then he said, "I know this is gonna sound crazy, but I remember his eyes." I never saw him again after this whole "do you trust me" thing, but I shudder to think that even though we weren't in contact all these years, that he might have been outside my window on different occasions. So creepy guy that I thought was my friend, that ended up being a lot older than I thought. Let's not meet again. I am not a social person, especially to family, and I'm a little estranged with my mother, despite the fact I still live with her, and I still love and care for her. I wanted to get her something as it was Mother's Day, and told her I was going out and would be back in time for dinner. She told me that she didn't want me to leave and that it was too dangerous right now. You see, my mum can get paranoid and worried easily, so I shrugged it off and told her I wanted to walk to the store anyway. Rite Aid is very convenient for most things, and I like going there. Plus, the one I go to has an ATM, and I can get there in 10 to 15 minutes at walking distance from my house. I walked into the Rite Aid, and I had to wait for an employee so I can select perfume for my mum. Waiting there, a creep walks straight towards me, asking me if I know where the towels were. It was a simple, normal question. I told him I didn't know, but pointed out where I thought the towels would have been. Then he stood there looking at me briefly until the employee showed up to unlock the perfume. The creep left. I didn't really think much about it at the time because I was killing time on my phone. Like, he could have asked the employee where the towels were because I'm just an unsure customer. Then again, I didn't tell him I was waiting for the employee, so I told the employee I'm just gonna get a gift card, bag, and stuffing paper. The creep was standing at a distance, looking at me while I was walking towards his direction. Then, without stopping to talk, I just asked him, "Did you find the towels?" And he said that he did. Then I walked past him, and that's when he started following me, asking me these questions: what my name was, what my last name was, if I lived around here, and what was my address. And he thought I was very pretty, apparently, and asked as well if he could come by and visit me. All of these questions while I'm trying to avoid him, and he's still following me around the store. He didn't have at least one towel or anything. Then I started thinking about the objective: get out and go home. Then he began groaning and breathing heavily, standing behind me, and then he walked away and left the store. Whatever, I was kind of confused, but I didn't want to know what he was doing behind me. I still just don't know what to think about it. I told the employee what happened, and all he had to say was, "I know, I saw." And then I asked if he's still out there. He vanished, so I called my cousin. She picked me up, and I had told her what happened. We went to our grandmother's house first because I wanted to visit her also for Mother's Day. I looked out the window and I saw a car sitting out there in the middle of the street. Then it drove away. I thought I was being paranoid until the second encounter. Now, before I mention this, there's a speculation of mine that he's probably been to my house. My grandma is neighbored behind my house, and we both live in the first row, so there's a possibility he could have been parked somewhere nearby. Because back in August, I was checking if everything was locked up, and I heard breathing. There's a joke between my mum and me that either the garage is haunted or there's someone in the house, and I asked her if her boyfriend was sleeping in the garage, and she told me he was not. So at this point, we kinda searched the house, and our house is pretty small, so there's nowhere to hide. We didn't bother to check the backyard, and I was standing at the sliding door when I heard breathing, but I was still standing near the garage too. It's scary because I'll never know if it was him or if it was all in my head. But my mum also heard something that night too. Now, could it be possible? It could have been him. My second encounter happened just after Christmas. I got back in touch with a friend and we had been talking, and I decided to call him on my walk to Rite Aid. It's been a while, and I mean I've been taking walks and thought the creeper had been long gone, but I still kept my guard up in case of other creepers too. Anyway, I told my friend I'd talk to him when I get back home. I look to my right because I see a car driving at my walking pace, and it was the Rite Aid creeper at eye level. He gave me eye contact with an ominous grin/smile on his face, with his tinted windows being sealed shut. Then, it's like he knew, so he drove straight into the parking lot right near Rite Aid. He didn't stop me. I got what I needed and exited. His car parked right behind me, so I ran straight into the grocery store next to Rite Aid and stayed there until I saw his car drive out and blended to the streets. I just walked home, pretended like the second encounter never happened. What would he have done if I hadn't have caught him in the act? Has he been stalking me? I'm not going to shelter myself at home in fear. There's no way. So Rite Aid Creeper, let's not meet a third time. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I do hope you enjoyed tonight's tales. If you did, don't forget, subscribe, like, comment, and all of that good stuff. I'd like to give a huge thank you as always to my amazing patrons who really do make a difference and help keep the channel running. If you are interested in becoming a patron, check out the link in the description. It helps me out a bunch, and you get so many cool perks for doing so, like your name on this list, as my patrons who are loved forever. If there is a story that you would like to share, feel free to send it to my email or post it on my Reddit page. Either are fine. But without further ado, it's time for me to sign off. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.